Yes, I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. The objective of this presentation is to present a document which we developed together within the unit in order to reflect to clarify rather concepts linked to and propose ways to include agroecology both at policy and implementation level. So this file is accessible by all participants. So we have a definition of agroecology, how we define it, real and concrete examples of how agroecology is a reality, and examples which show that agroecology is a reality in different countries, and also a contribution on how agroecology can contribute to EU priorities. We also discuss certain controversies on agroecology, and we propose also a number of interventions, possible interventions, to come to coherent action. So I won't be presenting this document, but it is available. Thank you. So I would like to present 2 points on the contribution of agroecology to EU priorities, and also the debate points. When it comes to EU priorities, agroecology shows a clear improvement on biodiversity in cultivated areas. So it's important that to understand that agroecology has a very important change and if impact. Second point, agroecology brings about a very strong contribution when it comes to adaptation. Émile Frison underlined this, spoken about diversification of the plot at the plot or farm level, but it also brings mitigation when we're talking about the products being produced and also the level of carbon in the soil. There's also a very clear contribution to healthy diets thanks to diversified production, but also better human health due to fewer pesticides and less use of chemicals. We insist on the fact that agroecology is also coherent with priorities on digital development, and we'll come back to this key issue. Agroecology is compatible with the development of some digital tools. Agroecology is a major source of employment when it comes to family farming, but also when it comes to service providers supporting agroecology, as well as value chain actors. It contributes to educational efforts. Christophe mentioned earlier all that can be done when it comes to training in agroecology. Agroecology helps in capacity building of actors, and it is in line with the 13 principles. Well, the 13 principles rather are in conformity with the different objectives of the EU. Next slide, please. Now, some controversies on agroecology and how we position ourselves in relation to EU priorities. So these are very important when we're developing discussions with our third parties. Next slide. Right. So what is important is to understand which innovations are important to favor agroecology. In the debate, we usually have debates to agroecology, which makes reference to traditional systems. It's true that the traditional systems give value to agroecology to allow some level of production, but also to allow the sustainability. Agroecology performance can be improved by innovation which is responsible, which respects some ethical frameworks, which favor uh, the knowledge including scientific and local know-how. For us, it's important to say that agroecology is open to innovation and it is supported by innovation in order to um, progress and avoid some blocking issues. When we ask the question if agroecology can feed an ever-growing population, I mean, Frison answered that scientific analysis which already exist, which say yes, but we need to add that we can improve agroecology performance in investing in research and in improving a certain number of agricultural practices in order to transform the issues. So I think this is very important. We're not only looking at the past, but also looking at the future. Another point which raises debate is the use of chemical products. Agroecology, the aim of agroecology is to reduce the use of pesticides to favor autonomy or the autonomy of the farmer. It does not mean that our position completely refuses the use of these pesticides and fertilizers. It depends, of course, on the level of consumption, the level of use. In African countries, the level of chemical fertilizers is very low. So the use of fertilizer is possible, but then when we look at um, huge use of pesticides, we need to look at the different approaches. So we need to look at the more global approach of the farm and depending on the situation. But it's not the unique solution and only focus on production. We need to look at the sensitive issue of synthetic inputs, as we said, to reduce their use, to support farm autonomy and adapt their use, so to production systems, level of consumption.
Another point is on genetical progress. There are a few conferences that are going on and about that topic. And the FAO and USAID are part of that system, and we push it in our CG system. We think that we need to work on increasing and the variety of animal species, but by changing the selection system by encouraging a selection that can be combined with agroecology. So, for instance, associating cultures. We can take an example. Cocoa has been selected to be cultivated on its own and but not worked on so that it can be done within a forest in an agroforestry ecosystem. So because the cacao tree, a cocoa tree is can be combined with a forestry ecosystem. So we work with local producers and organization of local producers to try to have to work in situ with genetical resources. We need to make sure that their own variety are recognized and even known away from their local places. Sometimes the local species are even increased, are bettered by the local producers. The fourth point around digital technology, Christophe mentioned that we finance actions with the CGIR around the digital technology. What we want to show is that for agroecology, we need technological tools are in line with the principle of agroecology. In particular, the idea of innovation and scientific knowledge and scientific and local knowledge as well. So digital tools should be really used towards the exchange of knowledge and the capacity of actors to learn from their own experience. So the idea would be to contribute to developing collaborative tools. At the moment, it's more transfer of knowledge rather than collaborative knowledge. We have a tendency to send farmers information on how, when, and what to do. And this is not in line with the agroecology principles, because those are based on local knowledge and exchange of knowledge. Next slide. And the debate on is the industrial farming included in that? When we look at the agroecological farming, it has a tendency to reinforce peasant farming. But the technical principles and social principles of agroecology can be applied to industrial farming. It's the case of certain Evia plantations in Indonesia, for instance, where there's a production of rubber within agroforestry ecosystem. So it's complicated, but it's not impossible. Another point is agroecology open to market, and to which point private actors can reinforce the agroecological principle. In terms of agroecology, it can only be conceived if producers have access to the market. So we need to think in value chains that recognize the produce from agroecology and give specific markets and mechanisms, so mechanism of certification, of premiums, and so on for produce of the agroecology system. So this is really important. And for us, agroecology is compatible and can develop only if we manage to include the private actors in this action. Émile Frison mentioned that a few actors within the agro-food business are willing to be involved in that. Danone is a good example. They are pushing towards agroecology because it's compatible with many of their produce and their commercial strategy. Next slide. Other point, often we are challenged to the question of scaling agroecology. Can it can enough people, enough surfaces be really involved in that new system so we can have a real change at scale? Well, it's not a question of diffusing a packet, you know, like for the Green Revolution. It's very different. It's more new method of intervention and reinforcing local capacities and local actors in the civil society or in the business sector, and work also parallelly on agriculture policies to work towards that goal. And we've mentioned the financing by other presenters today have mentioned that. And for my last point, Christophe mentioned it's important to work on new measures of performance. We cannot evaluate agroecological only on the criteria that we use for Green Revolution, so more yield and more productivity. We need to develop new metrics, new performance indicators that are technical, economic, and social, and also have indicators that will allow us to measure the impact on environment, so on ecology and on agricultural system in general. It's by doing that kind of work that we can notice that agroecology can be much more performing than other forms of farming that are more conventional, that are based on monoculture and use of external intrants. Next slide. And that was the conclusion.